Welcome back to BLOCKTV. It's time now for Links in the Chain. Andreas M. Antonopoulos is a man with a mission to provide education, growth, and development in the cryptocurrency space. A true believer in the power of the digital asset revolution who has kept a cool head in a tumultuous crypto marketplace. Andreas, firstly, thanks so much for being with us. We seem to be on track for a new bull market, the last 24 hours notwithstanding, and potentially another big hype cycle, the likes of which we've seen in the past, but perhaps on an entirely different scale. For the uninitiated out there looking to capitalize on this burgeoning market, as an educator yourself, where should these people start as they potentially enter new money and new interest into the crypto space?
Well, as you probably know, I'm not on the investment side, and I'm not that interested in price movements. So my advice has always been that the one thing that you can always invest in with a high degree of success that cannot decrease in price or be subject to volatility is education. If you learn a skill, that skill is transferable. It applies across a broad range of technologies. And you don't have to get the timing right. There's always a good time to learn a new skill. So my primary advice is invest in education instead of speculation.
An important advice, to be sure. And you've served as a facilitator and an educator, man, putting his time, I suppose, and his money where his mouth is in terms of putting out that sort of education into the crypto space and beyond. But while many regularly address the importance of education when it comes to the idea of mass adoption, education is a multifaceted tool. For those uninterested in learning the depths of the tech, who just sort of find the interest in the crypto markets, in crypto assets, do you think that there's hope that we can get the sort of mass adoption that so many in the industry hope for, while still ensuring those levels of education that those such as yourself see as so important?
Absolutely, but I think mass adoption is not going to come in the way most people think. Mass adoption to me is not people in Western developed nations using crypto to buy Starbucks, because there's no need for that. That's not the primary market need. I think for me, mass adoption is basically the opportunity, giving people a choice to have an alternative online currency that cannot be debased, controlled, censored, where you have a degree of transparency and predictability that is not currently on offer by traditional financial systems. And there's a market of 6 billion people who desperately need that. According to the latest statistics, more than 50% of the world's population now live under dictatorship or totalitarian regimes. They need this technology far more than the average Westerner. So to me, mass adoption isn't retail purchases with crypto, because you can easily do that, especially in developed worlds, with the tools we already have.
Certainly, that notion of those countries that really do need this infrastructure in the emerging, developing world, as opposed to the maybe plaything, more toy element, more speculative element of crypto markets. I certainly take your point there, but I suppose I look at examples like, let's say, just to pull up one, the OneCoin example, a Ponzi scheme where billions, by any estimate between $4 and some say upwards of $15 billion were scammed out of those who didn't fundamentally understand what a cryptocurrency was, what a blockchain is, what a distributed ledger actually looks like. Is that not a concern that people are going to misuse this sort of technology and lack of education?
Absolutely, they are. And that's why I put the emphasis on education. People need to learn about the criteria they need to evaluate before jumping in. And I think in many of these cases, this is a perfect example of the attitude of investment getting ahead of the attitude of education. So investments should be something you do after you already have a good understanding of the technology. And if you are not sure about that, then you're not ready to invest. And there's a lot of pitfalls. This is a double-edged sword. And part of the reason it's a double-edged sword is because the world desperately needs open financial products that can be accessed by the billions of people who are left out of the current financial system. But when you go into these open financial products, that also means that all of the vetting and security needs to be done by the investors themselves. They need to be aware of what they're getting into. And inevitably, as you see in any immature market, there will be people who take advantage, and you will get these Ponzi and pyramid schemes emerging.
Certainly. And the mantra of, DYOR, do your own research, obviously is paramount to the sort of cryptocurrency, digital asset ideology. But again, I can't help but go back to that idea when we talk about education and mass adoption, the question of where these sort of senses of education stem from. Because the fact of the matter is, as we all know, there are so many out there who don't do their own research, who don't educate themselves to the level they need to, and are privy and susceptible to scams that then governments may attempt to seek to come in and regulate against to protect those people. And I know you've spoken in the past about your views on government regulation and perhaps government oversight and overstep in these instances. Is there a path for digital assets to move between that fine balance between keeping its decentralized and potentially revolutionary nature, but also allowing people to truly be educated?
Yes, absolutely. So for my approach to this has been to focus on providing multilingual education in as many languages as possible, and making all of that education available under free and open licenses. So it's not only free to read for the average reader or watch the video or listen to the podcast, but also it's free to share and mash up and turn into additional educational products that are really designed for the local community and in the local language.
And it's certainly an important project, to be sure, to get that information out across a number of different facets and languages. One project, I guess, that is seeking, at least from its marketing side, to say that it is looking to spread out to the world and banking the unbanked and whatnot is, of course, the Libra project. Do you have any views on what role and impact that could play in the cryptocurrency markets going forward?
Well, Libra is fundamentally a different thing. It's the emergence of the first corporate currency, and it lacks all of the characteristics that make Bitcoin and other open blockchains interesting. So I've devised a set of criteria that people should use to evaluate these kinds of projects and ask a series of questions. Is this system open? Is it open to access, to participate? Does it require vetting or authorization? Is it borderless? Is it neutral to source, destination, purpose, and amount? Is it censorship resistant? Is it immutable? Is it publicly verifiable? And on all of those characteristics, Libra fails the test. It cannot be open, it cannot be borderless, it cannot be censorship resistant, it cannot be neutral, and it cannot be immutable, because in order to be all of those things, it cannot be controlled by anyone. Once it's controlled by someone, they have to abide by the regulations, which means that they're going to be chopped into 194 different regulatory domains, and then they'll have to make a patchwork of permissions, and as a result, it fails to do the one thing it says it's going to do. You cannot bank the unbanked from within the existing system of regulations, because it is precisely the system of regulations that result in underbanking. And therefore, you can't simply play to that. The interesting thing about open public blockchains is that they are instantly borderless and open to everyone, and therefore they can reach the people we need to reach.
But does that mean just because it fails the test of a true cryptocurrency, of a true decentralized asset, does that mean the project itself is destined to fail?
The project itself is destined to fail if the definition of success is to bank the unbanked and reach everyone. Then absolutely it is destined to fail, because you can't do that with that architecture. It will perhaps be a monumental success for Facebook and its shareholders, and also a very threatening development in our world, because it gives kind of the pioneers of surveillance capitalism the tools to extend surveillance capitalism into everyday financial lives of billions of people. And they may be able to get enough of their users to do that. But it will not be able to launch in the form that it's being described in the white paper. It will not be able to be launched in every country. It will be banned because it has to ask for permission. And as a result, it will achieve goals that are very, very different. Can it be successful? Yes. But can it be successful in opening the door to financial inclusion to billions of people? No.
All right. Well, I want to take the conversation now as we stand at the pinnacle of a new decade of 2020. Here we are with everyone sort of looking forward into what the next decade will bring and what the future looks like. And I want to ask a question that maybe at its face sounds pessimistic, but potentially could have an optimistic answer to it. Andreas, what do you think the next global economic crisis looks like for cryptocurrencies, digital assets, and distributed ledger technology?
Well, I mean, that's obviously an almost impossible question to answer because it's highly speculative. But I'll do my best. I think we're already on the verge of a big economic crisis. I think the situation that's happening in Asia with the spread of COVID-19 is going to precipitate an economic crisis, at least by damaging supply chains, even if it doesn't turn into a pandemic. So that's certainly going to be blamed as the reason for the economic crisis. But a global economic crisis has been coming for 10 years. None of the problems that happened in 2008 were fixed. And while I'm not an economics expert, I think the average person really can understand that a lot of it was just swept under the rug and bailed out, and the average person isn't much better off than they were then. How does that impact cryptocurrencies? I think that there's a tendency within the cryptocurrency space to look at this as an opportunity to test cryptocurrency as a lifeboat, as a safe haven. And I think that's a terrible attitude to have towards an economic crisis, because I think there's just as much chance that a slowdown in economic activity, especially in the tech sector, will reduce the amount of investment in the crypto space as well, which is part of the tech sector, and will cause a lot of people who are currently speculating to retrench and avoid investments that they see as perhaps also risky. So this could cut both ways, and we shouldn't be gleefully expecting to test the security of the lifeboat by sinking the ship. We're not ready for that kind of test. Cryptocurrency is not capable of supporting the scale of millions or even billions of people who might need to use it during an economic crisis.
But do you think that cryptocurrencies will be at that point where they're able to support those millions, tens of millions, billions, whatever it might be in the future? And if so, is that a light that you can see somewhere down the tunnel, or do you think this is still a long way off when it comes to the state of cryptocurrency technology and markets?
No, I absolutely think that the future of finance worldwide will be with much more decentralization, based on open protocols and open systems that can reach everyone, with a reduction in the need to authorize and vet participants, and instead build security mechanisms that do not depend on vetting, but depend in the kind of game theory that we see in proof of work and proof of stake systems and other consensus algorithms that might emerge. The future of finance is open, decentralized finance, and it will help bring the whole of humanity into an economic system that everyone can access. And I think that's going to happen. It may take several decades, however, to emerge that way, not because of the technology, but because of the geopolitics surrounding it. The ability of governments to control money gives them enormous power, and they're going to fight tooth and nail to preserve that power, even at the expense of their own people.
But to be clear, you do see the primacy of cryptocurrency or distributed ledger technology in some form or another as an inevitability.
Yes, open financial systems are more efficient, they're more equitable, they're more transparent, and they solve all of the scaling problems we have in the effectively industrial age financial system we have today, which is based on hierarchical systems of oversight and control that do not scale to solve global problems, and do not scale to include more than half of the human population that is automatically excluded from these systems. A system that excludes more than half of the human population is not a system that can survive in the future. We have to do better. And I think open finance will do that.
Mm-hmm. I want to touch on that point you made there, that idea of equality and equity in the global financial system. Now, according to the latest numbers coming from the 2019 Oxfam report, the world's richest 1% have more than twice as much wealth as the bottom 6.9 billion people combined. Now, this is a point that is often addressed. Many out there, I'm not far from the first to bring up the point of global inequality and these sort of issues. And this is something that you yourself have brought up on a number of different occasions. How exactly, without maybe not a step-by-step, but sort of in a sequence, how do you envisage the open financial world changing that metric significantly?
Well, the fundamental issue that breeds inequality, some of the fundamental issues that breed inequality in economic systems are lack of access, so barriers to entry. If you can't even participate in the system, how can you possibly succeed in a system like that? And the fact that these hierarchical systems encourage the kind of parasitic rent-seeking behavior that is anathema to capitalism. They don't enable free and open markets. What they do is they create concentrated, regulated monopolies that corrupt the political system, which in turn corrupts the economic system, in a cycle that just basically funnels billions to the top. So one of the ways you break that cycle is, first of all, by opening the door to everyone to participate and not keeping people out. And secondly, removing the opportunities for intermediation and parasitical rent-seeking that arise in hierarchical systems. In a system of finance that is hierarchical, the higher up you go, the bigger the flow of money, and all you have to do is stick a straw in that pipe and suck out as much as you can, which is essentially what global investment banks are doing today to the world economy. You can't fix that inequality without changing the architecture. And that's the fundamental way that open financial systems like cryptocurrencies and open public blockchains change things. They change the architecture so as not to funnel things into centralized control and monopoly.
So then would you say that you see these open financial systems at their core as inherently revolutionary? And does that take on the form beyond the financial world of the sort of street level revolutionary experiences that have rocked the world in the early part of the 21st century and certainly through parts of the 20th century?
Without a doubt. What we're talking about is a continuation of the same information revolution that started in the 1970s and 80s with the internet. This is a natural extension of that. The internet first made information and communication free. Then it made it possible for people to communicate with the entire world from anywhere, which effectively broke traditional newsmaking, but it also opened the door for a lot of people to get their ideas out. And it made it much more difficult for dictators to suppress communication, which has led to a number of both violent and non-violent revolutions and upheavals. This is just the extension of that, in that now the internet is making money open and free and global, which means that in the internet of money, you cannot censor financial transactions and you cannot take a whole population hostage to a currency experiment. And that will inevitably shift power from nation states and very, very large multinational corporations to individuals who take control of the money system into their own hands. That in itself is going to create revolutionary effects. But at the same time, you've got to think of this more broadly. This is a scalable system of trust based on network communications. We now have protocols for achieving trust over the internet. And that's going to change other things, not just money. It's going to change the allocation of governance, for example. We're going to have new models of governance and politics that are going to be based on network protocols too.
I wonder as well with you there, because you spoke about the internet as a mechanism for the free dissemination of information, and certainly in its earlier iterations, that's what it was. But as the internet has developed and as it's become more integral in our lives, there are now billions in the world who live under systems in which the access that they have to the internet and to the digital world is inherently restricted by a government or some sort of regulator. Does digital assets not run the same risk, either through ignorance or misuse of many millions, if not billions, out there taking up a system that inherently instills control despite the claims that it was intended to originally be freeing?
Well, I think we've got to make a comparison to what the situation was before. And I remember what access to the internet was, what access to information was before the internet. Even if you have parts of the internet that are heavily controlled, censored, and fed with propaganda, whether that's centralized large corporations like Facebook, or it's large firewalls that control the dissemination of information in China, this is still a much more open and free system than anything that came before. Before you had 2 newspapers and 2 TV stations. So, and even with a system as centralized and controlled as some parts of the internet are today, there are enormous holes that allow the dissemination of free information to persist. It is through holes like that Bitcoin emerged. So the internet was certainly free enough to create a black swan event like Bitcoin, and continues to build new systems for decentralized access to information. Not only will digital assets not succumb to centralized control, there will always be a corner, at least, of these systems that will remain open. But furthermore, this new economic model will actually re-decentralize parts of the internet by changing the model of monetization. The centralization of finance, as a side effect, leads to more reliance on advertising, which in itself has led to more centralization of control over information. So when we decentralize finance, we not only get decentralized finance, but we can also monetize the dissemination of information in a different way, meaning we can reopen the internet by changing the flows of money from readers to creators without putting everything through intermediary advertisers.
It's certainly a powerful tool for changing the vast structures that we know as they exist, although, as you seem to be saying there, Andreas, already they've been in flux for a considerable period of time already. Andreas, I would love to continue this conversation ad nauseum. I could go for hours yet, but unfortunately we need to wrap it up just here. Andreas M. Antonopoulos, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come speak with us. Fantastic to talk about some of these heady issues that dominate so much of the crypto space. So for those watching, make sure you keep with us at blocktv.com for all the latest in news and information. I'm westropp-evans. Thanks for watching.
For more news and updates, follow us on Twitter.